All right, why don't we get started? Um, so let me just share the screen and let's continue in the Imrei Yaakov. Yesterday we were talking about the difference between grama and garmi, but it's mostly an academic point because, I shouldn't say it's academic. There are times when a person may feel that he's not liable for damages because of whatever circumstances, and sometimes it does have to go to a beis din, and the beis din will have to assess whether the damage that was caused was directly causative or remotely causative, whether it's garmi or garama, and that might make a difference. But it's a very delicate issue, it's very gray, and it has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. And then what we saw in the Imrei Yaakov, and actually, before we go to the Imrei Yaakov, let's go to do some of the likutim at the very beginning of the siman, because they're more fundamental and foundational.
Rabbi?
Yes, Ron.
Just before we get started here, there was a question I had yesterday, but we ran out of time. Just going back to the idea of where the example given about the with the grandma with the dog, where you would, let's say, have the poisoned food, and then the dog ate it, and you wouldn't be chayav because it was sort of like a grandma. So couldn't that be moved to, let's say you had a situation where a spouse could do the same thing to, let's say you have an angry housewife who just really does not like her husband at all, and she would put out the food on the table, and the husband eats and the food is poisoned, and the husband eats the food.
Yeah, well, I hope your wife's not listening to this.
None of our wives are listening.
The truth is there might be a way to get off of capital punishment in that sense, right? No, she might be able to get off from getting executed. You're right. It's no different. Could you say that I didn't actually actively kill my husband? Yeah, the beis din might actually not execute her in that case. Is she liable for the death penalty by heaven? Yes, she is. And that's the issue. The issue is, when it comes to damages, there are ways to buck the system if you don't believe in God, right? And you're just trying to figure out a way to circumvent the legal issues, right? So, the Torah was written for people who believe in it. It was not written for people who don't believe in it. And I say that a lot of times, meaning that there are so many ways to circumvent halacha if you really want to. It's actually one of the things I was planning to speak about tomorrow, but I've actually chosen a different topic. But the one, I noticed that Rav Schwab has a beautiful Dvar Torah at the end of Sefer Bamidbar in this week's Parsha. At the end of Parshas Maseh, the very last topic of discussion is the daughters of Tzalafchad, that they married men from their own families, they married their cousins essentially, in order to preserve the land that they inherited, to make sure that it would stay within the tribe. What the Gemara points out is that they were not obligated to do so, but they did so voluntarily because they knew that it was Hashem's desire, Hashem's will, that the original apportionment of land should stay within the allotted tribes that it had been given to. But Hashem also gave them the option to marry whichever man that they wanted. Essentially, Hashem was basically saying, if you want to keep the tribal apportionment to the way that I've designated it, this would be the way to do it. Marry someone within your own tribe. But you're under no obligation. And then the Torah records that they followed Hashem's advice, and they married their cousins. Why is that the very last discussion in Sefer Bamidbar? So Rav Schwab says is because what you see from here is that when Hashem gave us the Torah, there are times when there was a certain amount of latitude given to man to decide how he's going to follow the Torah. You can either follow the Torah according to the letter of the law and try to find loopholes wherever possible, but that's not really an abiding with the will of God. And you may end up living your entire life as a person who says, well, I always followed the Shulchan Aruch whenever I had to, but when you get up to Shemayim, you're going to discover that you're not really actually the tzaddik that you thought you were. And so, I mean, that's really the message. The message is that, and that's why it ends with this topic, because it's such an important message about a universal message about what Judaism is all about, what the Torah is all about. Try to discover what Hashem wants, not what the halacha says you have to do, or not what the halacha says you're liable for. Okay, so with that in mind, and Ron, you should live long and be healthy. And if you need a taste tester, lots of luck. Okay, Asr Lahazik, Amrinan Begemara, Haiman Deboy Lemihavi Chasida Lakayim Mili Dinazikin. It is forbidden, when we started this chapter, the first halach is you're not allowed to damage someone else's property, even if your intention is to compensate them. Just like you can't steal from someone, even if your intention is to return the property. So the Gemara makes a general sweeping statement that if a person wants to be pious, he should fulfill the matter of nezikin, of damages. The hakavana, what our sages are essentially, what they mean by that statement, is l'chol dinim hamurim b'tlas abavos. Fulfill all of the case law and study all of the case law that is written in the three bavas, the three gates. What does he mean by the three gates? All the three tractates, Bava Kama, Bava Mitzia, and Bava Basra. Those are the three tractates. Originally, it was called Maseches Nezikin, and it was 30 chapters long. And later, the rabbis recognized that it was such a massive amount of information that they divided it into three separate tractates. V'hainu nezikin v'gezel v'hashavas aveda v'ribis v'ona. And what that means, and we learned this when we learned the introduction to Imrei Yaakov on this volume, is it refers to really all of Choshen Mishpat, the laws of damages, theft, returning lost items, not paying interest on loans, and ona'ah, and overcharging or underpaying. Hamazik mama. Okay, so that's just a good, sweeping introduction. It is the key to piety. Now, hamazik mamon chaveiro b'peshia ve'enio yodea ma hizik, that if a person damages his friend's property, and he did so by negligence, and he doesn't know precisely what he damaged. In other words, he has no idea. Let's say he was driving one day and he was driving negligently, and he ends up he drives into his friend's house or something, and he has no idea what the extent of the damage is. So nishba hanizik vinotel. So the damagee can simply, in a beis din, has the right to take an oath as to the value of the damages, and the beis din will award him based on his vow, based on his oath. Today, that would probably not fly. Today, a person would have to get an estimate from at least one vendor who's, a contractor who's going to give him an estimate on what the cost of the house is. And based on that, the beis din would award a certain amount. But back in the times of the Gemara, before people did business that way, all they would require is that a person could take a shavua and say, this is what I know that it will cost based on speaking to experts. And this was instituted by the sages to make it easy for a person who was injured through negligence to be able to collect what is due to him. And that's only when the damage was caused by negligence. If it was by accident, even if I still have to pay the guy, the Chachamim will probably require more evidence. Now, Hamazik Mamun Chavero, Biyad Sheshile Mo Niskaper Lo, Ve'ein Tzarech Levakesh Limcholo. Another important point, if you damage your friend's property, as soon as you compensate him for the damage, you have been atoned. You don't have to ask him mechila. So in other words, a guy may really despise you for having caused him damage. But if you once you pay him back, you're not obligated to go over to him before Yom Kippur and ask him for mechila. Now, there may be other circumstances where that's not true. What happens if he causes damage and you're willing to compensate him for the damage, but at the same time, there was a tremendous inconvenience because he crashed into your house and now you've got to move out and find another place to live. And there's so many aspects of damage that sometimes do not have a price tag assigned to them. It could be that you do have to ask a mechila in that situation where there are certain aspects of the damage which have caused him a non-financial inconvenience and pain in his life. Okay. Hayashikor kilot gam kein chayav. Even if a person was completely mentally incapacitated. Let's say he had taken, he was on some medication or he was totally drunk when he caused the damage, you're still chayav. You're still obligated to pay for the damages, which is an interesting concept because many times people claim that they're exempt because of temporary insanity, or they were on an anti-depression medication and that made them go nuts, or so that doesn't count. It doesn't count in halacha. Okay. Mamon chavero, if you damage your friend's property. So now he brings from the Rambam. He says, Kasaf Rambam, Aisha sheshibra kelim be'esha asasa melachoteha b'toch beita petura. A woman is cleaning the house and she damages property while she's cleaning the house. So when you think about it from a purely halachic standpoint, let's look at it from a completely cold and calculated halachic standpoint. The vase in the dining room was her husband's property. She was dusting the vase and all of a sudden it gets knocked over and it breaks. So she's damaged her husband's property. So she should have to pay for that, right? Should it's coming out of your ketubah, or it's coming out of some other thing, right? So the Rambam says no. She is putter in that situation. The Einza min hadin ela takana. Says, and this is one of the rabbis, takanas, rabbinic institutions that is not consistent with the law, but they stepped in here and they basically made that rule. And the reason is that there are times when perhaps a woman should be held liable to pay. Her husband gets her a new car. It's in his name. It's his money. And she ends up going ahead and crashing the car the first time she drives it out of the lot, right? So what are you going to do? This could create a huge amount of strife in the marriage. He says, She'im einata omer kain ein shalom b'toch habayit la'olam. Because if you're going to hold the wife financially responsible for every item that she breaks, there will never be shalom bayis. There will never be peace in the home. And this is, by the way, this is a very important caution to a man who's married, which is do not be overbearing in your house over financial matters. Don't take it out on your wife and say, I'm withholding your allowance for the week, which to me is, I don't give my wife an allowance. I basically say the money's in the bank, use it for whatever you need. But there are other situations where a husband says, this is the weekly allowance for the budget, and that's how they maneuver. But every relationship is somewhat different, I suppose. But in this kind of situation, the rabbis stepped in and they said, no, we've got to make sure that shalom bayis will not be destroyed. So if a woman breaks something or damages something, she is never held liable for compensation back to her husband. Ela nimtzeit nizheret v'nimna'at merov hamalachos v'nimtzeis ketata b'neihem ha'kam l'shona. The Rambam says if she would be held responsible for everything she breaks, she will desist from doing the work in the house because she's too fearful about breaking things, and there's going to be constant strife between the husband and the wife. Va'ayin Shulchan Aruch Even Ha'ezer Siman Pesif Yud Zayin Din Ze Omer Gam Im Girusha Achar Kach De'ena Chayeves L'Shalim Ma Shehizika. And as is pointed out by the Shulchan Aruch in Even Ha'ezer, which is the laws of marriage and divorce, the same holds true even if the husband divorces his wife. He cannot hold her liable for things that she broke over the course of the marriage. Okay? He cannot sue her after the fact and say, well, we're getting a divorce, so therefore I expect you to pay me for the car that you crashed, or, whatever it is. Okay. Let's see, what else? Katan, shehizik potter, afilu kishayagdil. He says, a minor who causes damage, even when he gets of age, he cannot be held liable for the damage that he caused when he was a minor. Kaven de b'sha lo haya ben das, because at the time when he caused the damage, he was not of mental proper cognition, and therefore, since he wasn't yet considered a person who was a mentally cognizant individual, he's not held liable. A shikar, by the way, is different, because a person who's an adult and gets intoxicated through medication or through alcohol is held liable because he put himself into that state. But if a katan is by nature that state, and therefore he's not liable. And there are those who argue that if an individual remembers that when he was a little kid, he broke, his neighbor's window, even though he can't be held financially liable once he becomes an adult. But if he wants to go lifnim mishurasa, then above the letter in the law, that is considered to be the proper thing to do. So think back in your childhood, gentlemen. How many times did you break a window of your neighbor? And I know it may be a long time ago, and the guy may no longer be alive. But think about tracking down his heirs and seeing if you could reach out to them and fix the window. I say that only half tongue in cheek, because I cringe. There's one episode in my life where I was shooting stuff at my friends at a breakfast, and I meant to hit one of my friends, and I hit an adult, and it got me, and I was able to avoid the bullet because they never caught the culprit. But it still haunts me to this day. Anyway, the Isa, I was already bar mitzvah. I was in high school already, but still haunts me. Anyway, the Isa b'shulchan aruch sopsim in shin mem test the roy lebeistin lahakos haktanim kefikoach katan al hageneva kidei shelo yihiyu regilim ba. The Shulchan Aruch writes that a beistin has a right to actually mete out corporal punishment against children who steal, so that they not get into the habit of stealing. And also if they are regular damage causers, the Beis-Din has the jurisdiction to carry out corporal punishment, which I don't think would fly today. If a Beis-Din group of rabbis tried to slap a child today, they'd probably go to prison. So I would say, don't try this at home. Beis-Din, don't try. Beis-Din should not attempt to do this. But technically, in times when there was a religious, where there was more autonomy for Beis-Din to do this to children, this was indeed the practice, that they would mete out corporal punishment to children. Okay. Mi shehifsid etrog mehudar shel chavero vein kodem hachag uvein betoch hachag tzarech l'shalim lo kama shehu shaveh limacher ve'enu yachol lihipater be'esrog pasha. If I end up damaging my friend's esrog, either before Sukkot or during Sukkot, I have to pay him what its fair market value is. And I cannot exempt myself by replacing it with a less expensive esrog. V'hu hadin b'tfilin. And the same thing is true if I damage my friend's tefillin and it was a very expensive pair of tefillin, I cannot pay him back with a less expensive or, a lower quality pair of tefillin. Shechayev l'shalim d'meihim v'eni yochalos tefillin kasherim pshutim. Right? I can't just give him a stam kosher pair of tefillin. If his was gasos, like a very fine quality hide, and it was a very expensive sofer. I mean, a person today could pay $3,000 for a pair of tefillin, so just because you can also get a pair for $750 or $1,000, you cannot exempt yourself by giving to him and telling him, well, this is still kosher. You have to give him the value of what was damaged. That seems to be fairly intuitive. Let's see here. Let me just make sure that I haven't jumped to. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. We go a little bit further, and we said v'chol hagorei nezek, that if you do causative damage, you're still going to be liable b'dinei shamayim in heaven. Rofei mumcha sheta'a v'hizik pater midinei adam v'chayev b'dinei shamayim. If a physician, is Joby on the call today? Any other doctors? Physician makes a mistake and he ends up injuring his patient. What are his legal obligations? So let's see
here. We didn't get that far.
Yeah. Oh, what do you mean? Yeah, no, I think we are. No, this is we're still
made it to.
We're still in Sif. We're still in Sif Aleph.
Oh, we haven't finished Sif Aleph. We only got halfway through.
Right. Yeah. Rofe mumche sheta v'hizik, an expert doctor. Now, there's a doctor who's been certified by the AMA, or is it called the CMA, the Canadian Medical Association, and he knows what he's doing. But he makes a mistake, and everyone makes mistakes. Even doctors make mistakes, and he ends up injuring his patient. So he cannot be held liable in a criminal court in a Beis Din, unless there's gross negligence, of course. But he can be held liable in a heavenly court, meaning that God will take him to account if he could have done more and he just failed to do so. So he can't be held liable in a regular court if he did what was the normative practice, but he can be held liable by heaven. Now, so obviously that has to be also broken down more carefully. He's quoting from the Sefer Shevat HaLevi, which is a contemporary Sefer. Obviously, if there's gross negligence, right, and he was, or let's say, there was a case in Texas of a doctor who claimed to be an orthopedic surgeon, but really didn't know what he was doing. So in that situation, he would be held liable even in a criminal court, in a Beis Din, a human Beis Din. But this guy knows what he's doing, and he is certified. But he had a bad day, and if a surgeon can have a bad day, and unfortunately the patient can get injured or die. So God will hold him liable for that mistake to the extent to which he was in some way negligent for not perhaps getting a better night's sleep, or not preparing better for the procedure or whatever it is. Next, Nachri Shehizik B'derech Grama. If, let's say, a non-Jew does causative damage, whether or not we can hold him or her liable is a tshuva within itself. Siva Lagoy Lasos Hezek Israel Yesh Omrim Dechayev Hasholeach. If I hire a Gentile to cause damage to somebody else, so then in that case, even though normally you don't hold a person liable for incentivizing someone else to do a sin, but in this case, since you gave money to a non-Jew who's not who doesn't feel bound by that moral code. So then you would be held liable according to many opinions if I hire someone to cause damage. Okay, now, all right. I think we're going to hold it here for today. We'll continue with the next one where he goes over the differences between grama and garmi. And let me wish you all a good Shabbos. I'm going to just finish a couple of minutes earlier. Any quick questions before we break? Okay.